morning, dear students. Because of the current situation, we're experimenting with online teaching, and I'm experimenting as well. So instead of having a normal class, you'll get an USOS mail with some materials, and this is one of them. We are still in the 18th century. We are still reading some parts of Lawrence Stone's book on family, sex and marriage in England. If you have access to this book, great. Read about the mating arrangements in the 18th century and the effective individualism in the family. If you cannot get access to the book, there will be other materials in the links in the USOS mail. So read that and watch that. So if you remember, we stopped our discussion in the Age of Reason, when on one hand critical thinking and individualism were gaining popularity, on the other hand the man of sentiment, the man of feeling became a new important way of judging a person's humanity. So there were movements against cruelty, against the slave trade, against the maltreatment of the mentally ill, and all these things, all this that Stone calls affective individualism. So the combination of the appreciation of the individual and the appreciation of feeling and humanitarianism start to be seen within the family. So we have a greater need for privacy. So people want to have their own personal spaces like bedrooms. They are more polite at the table. They start using things like forks and handkerchiefs and night dresses rather than sleep naked. And also mating arrangements and arrangements within the family. So for example, the patriarchal system start to be different. They start to be changed. So traditionally, in the previous epochs, reasons for marriage were economical, social, political. It was an arrangement between families rather than individual people. Now, with the rise of affective individualism, we have the foregrounding of personal affection. So friendship, shared interest, companionship, longer courtship as good grounds for marriage, much better than money. If you remember Hogarth's Mariage à la Mode, which we watched last week. Also, physical attraction and romantic love are more appreciated. They are still not seen as sufficient grounds for marriage. Especially romantic love is seen as too obsessive and too unreasonable. It is sometimes even perceived as a minor mental disease, and there are some home cures for romantic love which you might want to try. The main remedy was orange blossom water. You can still buy it if you need it. So but the companionate marriage, it means the marriage of friends, the marriage of companions, becomes a new ideal, something that is gradually becoming the norm, something that is gradually becoming more advisable in the society. So closer bonding between parents and children results in the decision to give children more freedom, also freedom in choosing the future spouse. Also the fact that it is a closed, domesticated nuclear family, so further moving away from distant kin, from the local community, The nuclear family becomes relatively independent on the kin. There are some new customs becoming popular. For example, the custom of the honeymoon. Even relatively less wealthy people see the importance of allowing the newlyweds to go away together for as long or as short time as they could afford, but to give them time to get to know each other, usually also in the sexual sense. It is seen as good grounds for a happy marriage. Also, the education of women. In the 18th century, among the richer sections of the society, women start being educated. They are literate, they engage in correspondence, they read novels. This is a novel thing in the 18th century, to have books that tell stories. They tell stories about human experience, about human psychology. They are extremely popular and they are very well suited to the times. Rich ladies, those who didn't have to work for the family, of course, spend time reading and writing. Another very popular 18th century social phenomenon are the salons. That is the informal, friendly groups of people who enjoy intellectual leisure. So they meet to discuss the latest books and theater plays and philosophies and science. Most of these salons are male, but there are some mixed salons. There are some friendly societies, informal friendly societies that group women. You'll get some materials about the most famous of them called the Blue Stockings Society. This was an informal women's group in mid-18th century England, grouping some aristocrats, noblewomen, socialists, intellectuals. You'll get the list in the link. And they strongly believed in the education of women, in the intellectual development of women, in female friendship as well. They were called the Blue Stocking Society because they wore blue stockings. They created a fashion for wearing blue stockings rather than black stockings, which were the mainstream fashion. As far as 18th century education of women goes, it was never for the benefit of only those women. It was mostly for the benefit of men. And as you will learn next week, the man responsible for that was very largely a French philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And according to his views, the education of women should always be relative to men. It means that women should be educated, they should be literate, but only because it makes them better wives and also better mothers. They would be more beneficial to men in times of the companionate marriage. So in the 18th century we have a dominant philosophy that says that of course men and women are different, but they should try to be intellectually closer together. They should try to bridge the gap between the sexes through education, through shared interest, through spending time together, enjoying culture together, and generally living together. So this is of course true mostly for the gentry and the aristocracy. still in the 18th century, the dominant social groups, those who didn't have to work. The middle class didn't have the money, didn't have the means to follow such examples, although they tried. And this is the situation with the companionate marriage and the effective individualism in the family. Okay. Of course, this was all theory about the companionate marriage. The practice, as it always is with practice, was very often quite different. So in the second part, I would like you to meet two 18th century women. One was called Lady Mary Granville. She's better known with the name that she got from her second husband, Mary Delaney. And you'll get some materials, and you'll get an article I wrote about her for the conference in our institute from Queen Anne to Queen Victoria. She's one of the women that Stone mentions in his book, and her life story is quite typical for the 18th century. She was from an aristocratic family, but not very rich herself. Her part of the family was impoverished. So when she was just a teenager, she was forced to marry a much older man, someone who was a friend of a rich relative, someone who would boost the social position of the family. So I would say a very traditional way of arranging a marriage. She found her husband repulsive physically, but she was too poor to have anything to say, so she was married. And she lived with this man for a few years, and she was only freed when he died. She kept a diary all her life. This is something that many women in the 18th century would do. They kept diaries, they kept correspondence with their friends, so we know quite a lot about her life. She was quite a gifted woman. In many artistic areas. She designed gardens, she wrote a book. She, of course, like many women from her sphere, enjoyed different crafts, handicrafts, embroidery, decorating. You will see this in the article. When she became a young widow, she for quite a few years did not marry again. She just enjoyed a free life. She was much richer as a widow than she was as an unmarried girl. She had a circle of other rich lady friends. But later in life, I think in her 40s, she decided to marry again, and this time it was someone she chose as her companion. So she had a chance to have a companionate marriage in her life, but this was her second marriage. Her second marriage was a marriage of friendship, choice. She chose a man not for his money. He was a Protestant clergyman in Ireland. They lived there for a while. Unfortunately, he also died before her. What is interesting about Mary Delaney is that after she was widowed for the second time, she started a quite successful artistic career, and she invented a new art form which she called paper mosaics, and which were botanical images made of cut paper. You will see some images in the links, and they are quite beautiful. So that's the first woman I would like you to meet. The other woman I would like you to meet was called Hester Thrale, and she was one of the blue stockings. She was one of the intellectual, educated women of the 18th century. She also kept a diary. We know quite a lot of her life from her diaries. She was from what you might call a rich upper middle class section of the society, and she was also married twice. After her father had gone bankrupt, so to save the financial position of her family, she married a businessman, a rich brewer, who would later sit in parliament for some time. Uh, they weren't very happy, but as many families in the 18th century, they had a lot of children. They had 12 children altogether. Not all of them survived into adulthood. We'll talk about child rearing and some new concepts in parent-child relations next week. For now, just remember she had many children and she was following the new fashions. She tried to be a good modern mother, a new mother that Rousseau advocated, so an engaged woman, someone who would try to be a visible presence in the lives of her children. It didn't always work very well, but what Mrs. Thrale is remembered for are her diaries, her quite extensive circle of friends, some of them quite famous. The most famous would be the man who for many people, even now, epitomizes 18th century in England. That is Samuel Johnson, Dr. Johnson, the most important, probably, English intellectual of this generation, also the author of the first dictionary of the English language. So Mrs. Thrale was quite friendly with him. They corresponded, they met in social circles quite a lot. She wrote about him in her diaries, and his biographer James Boswell also wrote about her, so yes, they knew each other quite well. What is interesting about the married life of Mrs. Thrale is that she was also widowed eventually, and she chose her second husband, and this was someone who shocked her friends and who shocked even her children. She married an Italian music teacher, younger than herself, and they moved to Italy. From what we know, most of her children didn't want to have anything to do with her after that. This was a family scandal, but at least what Mrs. Thrale, or now Mrs. Piozzi, wrote in her diaries, she was very happy. She finally had a kind of relationship, a kind of loving marriage that she always wanted. So that's it for this week. Please look at the links, read about the Blue Stockings, read about these two women. You may want to try and find some illustrative material, some paintings from the 18th century depicting good marriages, companionate marriages, or at least as such they were presented in painting. We'll start with that next week, and we'll talk about parents and children. I will try to have the Moodle sub-page organized for this course. I'm currently waiting for the reply regarding that, but I hope by next week it will be ready, so you'll see some illustrations and some more materials there. Thank you very much. Keep safe, stay at home, and yeah, well, try to enjoy the situation. Thank you.